Detainees are people who are being held in jail despite not having been convicted of a crime for humanitarian reasons, treatment, guardianship, or protection, or because of crimes or legal violations. This category of peoples include not only those who have been deprived of their liberty as a result of crimes or infringements or in compliance with the law, whether they have been accused or convicted, but also those who are in the custody and supervisions of certain institutions, such as psychiatric, hospitals, and other facilities for people with physical, mental, or sensory disabilities, institutions for children and the elderly, and centers for immigrants, refugees, asylum, or refutations of liberty. This means that criminals must always enjoy basic needs such as food, water, and shelter. The misconceptions that convicted are in terror has created condition for them to be mistreated instead of threatening them this way. Government officials as well as the public need to recognize and speak out about the value of these criminals' lives. So, in order to decrease and eliminate this kind of violations, the Philippines Constitution makes law protect prisoners and detainees from the human rights violations.
A prisoner is anyone who is deprived of personal liberty against his or her will following conviction of a crime, while detainees are individuals who are kept in jail even though they have not yet been convicted of a crime. Example, the U.S. debt deadlock between the Democrats and Republicans that springs up from time to time is a classic example of prisoner's dilemma. Let's say the utility or benefit of resolving the U.S. debt issue would be electoral gains for parties in the next election.
Prisoners and detainees are arguably the most vulnerable, neglected, and the forgotten for their rights. Issues of abuse and their conditions in the prisons are one of the major problems that prisoners and detainees are facing because they are incarcerated. Others prisoners can no longer be taken care of because they focus more on this outside. So, it is said that they are weak and often neglected, especially their rights, and also because they do not have the ability to defend themselves. The Philippines prison system has become a site of human rights abuses, as inmates are subjected to harsh living conditions within the prison walls. Prison gangs and prison governance in the Philippines. Prisons in the Philippines are still backward and increasingly overcrowded due to insufficient funding from the governments. The problem of the overcrowding associated with the ongoing war on drugs. Some common conditions include depressions, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. Recent research by the Bureau of Justice Statistics shows that more than half of all people in the prisons have mental health issues. In fact, around 1.25 million inmates live with mental health conditions. Inmates generally lose their right to privacy prison.
Throughout much of history, people acquired rights and responsibilities through their membership in a group, a family, indigenous nation, religion, class, community, or state. Most societies had traditions similar to the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That is to say, in the past, people relied on the regulations established by the leader or head of their society. They simply understand their responsibilities but are oblivious of their basic rights. So they do what they should, knowing that if they disobey any of the rules, they will be punished. They simply follow the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which means that treat them the way you want them to treat you or you will be punished. But how do criminals and convicts relate into this? Criminals have been punished in the past for their actions. As a measure of retaliation and justice for the victims and the state, they have been punished with a brutal and dreadful punishment. Of course, before the proclamation of human rights, people had no clue of their natural rights, such as the right to life, freedom from torture, and liberty, particularly those criminals who had been sentenced to death or torture. There were also no due process before for the offender nor a lawyer to stand for him, so they just execute them without knowing if they really committed the crime. As human rights were unknown before, they often punish criminals through retribution and rely on horrific kinds of punishment, unlike in our present times where we use rehabilitation to reform the prisoners. The first death sentence statutes were enacted in the 18th century by King Hammurabi of Babylon and was famous for the kind of punishment which is the lex talionis from the code of Hammurabi, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It aimed to punish and have revenge to the offender as a form of justice for the victim. They believed that offender should receive what they gave to their victims. But before that, the Roman law of the 12 tablets of the 5th century used crucifixion, drowning, beating to death, burning alive, and impalement were all used to carry out death penalties, while the draconian code of Athens of the 7th century made death the only punishment for all offenses. In the 10th century, hanging became the usual method of execution in Britain, and in the 16th century, some common methods of execution at the time were boiling, burning at the stake, hanging, beheading, and execution were carried out for such capital offenses as marrying a Jew, not confessing to a crime, and treason. Examples of punishment in the past that violated a convict person's human rights, and if you compare this to current prisoner punishment, you'll be glad that there is a universal declaration of human rights and there are rights for prisoners. The first one is the crucifixion. This is the method of nailing or tying people to a wooden cross and then leaving them out in the open field. People will see them and will make them scared to commit a crime as they see them die slowly. And the second one is using rats to kill people. There was a thing called a rat trap where a rat would be put inside a cage. The bottomless cage would be placed on a convict's body and the other side of the cage would be heated. And the rat, finding the other side black by the heat, would slowly eat away the victim's flesh to make way for itself. And the third one is the brazen bull. The condemned person would be locked inside and fire would be set beneath the bronze bull, heating the bronze till the person inside get roasted to death. The fourth one is flaying. Convicted were often punished or tortured in the early ages for being skinned alive. Depending on the amount of skin removed, they either died or live a life of a mentally scarred cripple. And the fifth one, the breaking wheel, another classical mode of executing capital punishment, was by using the breaking wheel. This extremely simple device consisted of a wheel to which the convicted would be tied, and sometimes of spikes. The convicted would have his limbs beaten with a club or a cudgel, and with the turning of the wheel, the bones in his body would slowly break, leading to an excruciatingly painful death. And number 6, impalement. Impalement by pike, pole, spear, hook, or stake, and people convicted for treason or crimes against the state would be punished like this. Different parts of the body would be penetrated for different crimes in this gruesome method, though all of those eventually led to a very painful death.
Crushed under an elephant. In Vedic era, as well as other countries of Southeast Asia, capital punishment by crushing the convict's skull under an elephant was a particularly common method. In this public show, elephants were trained to kill or torture their victims directly or over time. The elephants were sometimes, very rarely, forced to dismember the criminal rather than killing him fully. Rape by wild animal to death. People in the old Roman Republic valued a good show, and nothing is more entertaining than animals attacking and killing people to death. If it happened to be a woman, she would be raped by specially trained old creation until she died, just as poor Locusta did. Sawed in half. It indicates that victims were commonly chopped in half as a kind of death punishment. This execution method was utilized in various places of the world, including the Roman Empire, Spain, and Asia. Exsanguination, in which a living person's organ were removed and he died gradually, was another similar type of punishment. Death by boiling. People used to enjoy playing with their meat or their convicted, and of course, it was popular to torture the accused in oil or water until they died, though it was not as popular and as other ways because there was no direct display of blood. It still had a following in Europe and Asia. Punished by the rack. The rack was a common torture device with a rectangular wooden frame. The convicted's limbs would be connected on four sides and strained using hooks and rollers until they were torn from the body or destroyed completely. It was usually employed to induce confessions or provide information. Cropping the ears. As it was described in the Hunchback of Notre Dame, this particular punishment was executing by cropping the ears of people. And sometimes, if the crime was not too grave, their ears would simply be nailed to the pillory for some time. In most cases, this punishment didn't kill the convicted, save the cases where they died because of later infection of the wound. Burning at the stake early people like a nice fire. And what better way to light a fire than by burning someone at the stake? This was a popular method of executing persons convicted of treason or evil since it created a big spectacle and served as a warning to others not to commit such crimes.
Present human situation. The new Dangerous Drugs Act, which went into effect in 2002 and provides harsher punishment and lowers the crime threshold required for arrest, has led to a recent increase in the prison population. The Manila City Jail currently holds nearly 5,000 inmates. Within its walls are men, women, minors, people with mental illnesses, and people with health problems. While the Philippine government continues to launch various projects and plans for the rational relocation of prisons, the goal remains buried in bureaucracy and lack of funding. The prison population grew as the new law regulated new crimes such as the mentioned New Dangerous Drugs Act. Prisoners who are afflicted by different intellectual sicknesses or abnormalities will be determined and handled in specialized establishments beneath scientific management. The Manila City Jail has predominant compounds housing divided alongside prisoners' gender lines, age, and mental state. Persons who are determined to be insane shall no longer be detained in prisons, and preparations will be made to take them to intellectual establishments as quickly as possible. The common dormitory is cramped, poorly lit, and with hardly ever any ventilation. It stinks, even though wiped clean and scrubbed with the most harsh of disinfectants. The dormitory is blisteringly warm and uncomfortable. Inmates fall clean prey to outbreaks of pores and skin sicknesses together with boils, infections, and diverse allergies. The Manila City Jail was initially constructed to house 1,000 inmates, but it presently homes about 5,000 inmates. Inmates take shifts in napping on naked floors. During daytime, inmates couldn't droop or take a sit down at the ground for loss of space. Furthermore, the daily budget allocated to each prisoner is only 35 pesos. This amount includes 3 meals a day in addition to the budget for drinking water. Prisoners' food usually consisted of rice, staples, and meat, usually canned sardines. Food has little nutritional value and is processed and sanitary. The prison system facilitates punishment, atonement, deterrence, and re-education, as well as social protection. But in many cases, these goals are not achieved. The prison system is limited to punishments and retribution. It does not care about the rehabilitation and re-education of the offenders. The experience of the Manila City Jail represents the current problems of the prison system. What is put behind bars is not only the body but also the basic human rights of prisoners.
International laws. International human rights standards governing the treatment of prisoners. The principal international human rights documents clearly protect the human rights of prisoners. So the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or the ICCPR, and the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, they both enable people to enjoy the wide range human rights. And the two also, they both also prohibits or pinagbabawal din po nila yung torture and other inhuman, cruel, and degrading treatment or punishment without exception or derogation. Then the Article 10 of the ICCPR, or the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, mandated that all persons deprived of liberty should be treated with respect for the inhuman dignity of the human person. The Article 10 of the ICCPR also requires that the reformation and the social readaptation of prisoners must be the essential aim of imprisonment. Basic principles for the treatment of prisoners declares the United Nations Human Rights Committees explain that it is the state's responsibility, or the state has the positive obligation towards the persons who are particularly vulnerable because of their status, or obligasyon po ng state ang kanilang mga detainees and prisoners dahil po sila po ay mga persons deprived of liberty, or kumbaga po ay parang nawalan po sila ng kakayahan na makapag-provide para sa sarili nila. And the United Nations Human Rights Committee stated that not only may persons deprived of their liberty not be subjected to torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, but neither may they be subjected to any hardship or constraint other than that resulting from the deprivation of liberty. Nasabi po dito na may risk po na maka-experience ang mga prisoners and detainees ng torture and kung ano-ano pang mga hindi makataong pagtrato sa kanila, and including na po dito yung medical and scientific experimentation. And may risk din po ang prisoners and detainees na makaranas ng any hardship or constraint treatment, which is siya pong pinafocus din ng United Nations Human Rights Committee na parang ipaglaban po yung mga prisoners and detainees na hindi po makaranas nito. And the United Nations Human Rights Committee also stated that respect for the dignity of such persons must be guaranteed under the same conditions as for that of free person. If the persons deprived of their liberty enjoy all the rights set forth in the ICCPR, subject to restrictions that are unavoidable in a closed environment. So, yung mga prisoners and detainees po is na-enjoy or na-exercise naman po nila yung kanilang mga karapatan na nakasulat po or nakaset po sa International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Then the United Nations Human Rights Committee po stressed that it is a fundamental and universal applicable rule to treat persons deprived of their liberty with dignity and humanity.
So let's talk about the international law for the prisoner or the detainee. So the first United Nations Congress on the Prevention of Crime and the Treatment of Offenders adopted the state minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. This was an important start, and in 2015, the United Nations General Assembly adopted expanded rules known as the Nelson Mandela Rules, in honor of arguably the most celebrated prisoner of the 20th century. So, in international law, in Nelson Mandela Rules focus on the law for prisoner and detainee. The Nelson Mandela Rules is focused on obligation to treat all prisoners with respect for their inherent dignity and value as a human being, and to prohibit torture and other forms of ill treatment. They offer detailed guidance on a wide variety of issues, ranging from disciplinary measures to medical services. So the Nelson Mandela Rules is a focus on the obligation to treat all prisoners with respect for their inherent dignity and value as a human or as a person. So in Mandela Rules, we have 122 rules that we need to study and we need to know. So what is it? So first, the rules 1 to 5 is about the basic principles and rules of general applications. So in Rule 6 to 10 are about prisons, file management, where all the important prisoner files and data are present. In other words, in Rule 6 to 10 is the important files of the prisoner. Rule 11 is about the separations of categories. The different categories of prisoner shall be kept in separate institutions or parts of institutions and files of the prisoner. Rule 11 is about the separations of categories. The different categories of prisoner shall be kept in separate institutions or parts of institutions, taking account of their sex, age, criminal record, the legal reason for their detention, and the necessities of their treatment. So, in other words, in Rule 11 is their criminal record and the legal reason why they are become prisoner. And the Rule 12 to 35 are about the accommodations of prisoners and detainees, as to where they sleep and work, as well as their personal hygiene, food, clothing and bedding, sport and exercise, and their health care services. So, proceed in Rules 36 to 46 are about the restrictions, disciplines, and sanctions prisoners and detainees will have in order to secure operation on prison grounds. So in Rules 47 to 57 are about the instruments of restraints that can be used against prisoners and detainees, also about the searches of prisoners and cells, and also the different information and complaints that prisoners have. In other word, the Rule 47 is to 57 is focused on the compliance that prisoners have. So in Rules 58 to 72 are about the amount of contact a prisoner may have on the outside world. Also, their right to access different books on the prison's library, religion, the retention of prisoners' property like money, valuables, and clothing, notifications that prisoners may receive about his or her transfer to another institution or about his illness or injury, and investigation with prison grounds. So, Rules 58 to 72. In easy word, this focus that the prisoner may have contact on the outside world or the outside world, and also their right to access different books in prison's library. In Rule 73 to 85 are about the removal of prisoners and institutional personnel, and about internal and external inspections in the prison administration and operation. So the Rules 86 to 108 are about the guiding principles of a prisoner under a sentence as to their treatment, classification, and individualization, privilege, work, educational, and recreational programs, and their social relations and aftercare. And the Rules 109 to 110 are about prisoners with mental disability and health conditions. So, in the Rules 109 and to 110 is focuses on the health of the prisoners, the health conditions of the prisoners. And the Rules 111 to 120 are about prisoners or detainees and their arrest or awaiting or in their trial. So, the focus of 111 and to 120 rules is the prisoners that is under arrest or awaiting or in their trial. Wala pang final sentence. So in the Rule 121 is about civil prisoners, people that are imprisoned for debt. And the Rule 122 is about persons that are arrested or detained without charge. That is the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the treatment of prisoners, also known as the Mandela Rules. So, the prisoners are not denied their basic human rights. In fact, prisons are technically not allowed to discriminate on race, religion, and their status right now. The rights is relating to legal assistance and humane treatment are just as important in making sure all prisoners able to maintain some equality of life while incarcerated.
Domestic laws is usually attributed to a country's internal laws. Domestic laws contains the law that defines the behavior and conduct of individuals and organizations within a country and is also known as municipal or national law. Domestic laws also involve local laws and regulations such as those governing urban areas. So the main difference between international law and domestic laws or national law is that international law regulates external relations between two or more countries by means of signing treaties and agreements that concerns different goods, trades, and sometimes oils on some countries, while national law or domestic law is applied within the boundaries of a country and is created in accordance within the constitution of the state. International law cannot be enforced. However, it offers some sort of system or a guidance or a preference for a wider international cooperation, which led to the creation of the UN as we know now, or the United Nations. So in terms that international law cannot be brought out or applied to a country. but most of the time it serves as a guidance or as a reference that other countries can use in order to create laws. So, in our research paper, we included two laws that we have found. First one is the Act number 1533, which is an act providing for the diminution of sentences imposed upon prisoners convicted of any offense and sentenced for a definite term of more than 30 days and less than life in consideration of good conduct and diligence. While the next law that we have included is RA 9745, which is an act penalizing torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment and prescribing penalties.
Act number 1533, an act providing for the diminution of sentence imposed upon prisoners convicted of any offense and sentenced for a definite term of more than 30 days and less than life in consideration of good conduct and diligence. Section 3. In Section 3, if a prisoner be prevented from laboring by sickness or from infirmity not evidently imposed by himself or by other cause for which he is not responsible, he shall be entitled for good conduct to the same deduction from his sentence each month as above provided. Section 4. In Section 4, for especially meritorious conduct the whole or any portion of the time lost through fractions of the rules or discipline may be restored to the prisoner. 5. In Section 5, detention prisoners who voluntarily offer in writing to perform such labor as may be assigned to them shall be entitled to credit in accordance with the provisions of this Act, which shall be deducted from such sentence as may be imposed upon them in event of their conviction. Section 7. In Section 7, subject to such review and in accordance with such rules and regulation as may be prescribed from time to time by the Secretary of Public Instruction. For the wardens or officers in charge of insular or provincial jails or prisons shall make and keep such records, and take such further action as may be necessary for the carrying out of the provisions of the Act. Section 8. In Section 8, the public good requiring the speed enactment of this bill, the passage of the same is hereby expedited in accordance with the Section 2 of an Act prescribing the order of procedure by the Commission in the enactment of laws passed September 26, 1900.
Another law that can protect prisoners and detainees. Republic Act Number 9745, or an act penalizing torture and other cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment and prescribing penalties therefore. In Section 2, Statement of Policy, it is hereby declared the policy of the state. In second paragraph, to ensure that the human rights of all persons, including suspects, detainees, and prisoners, are respected at all times, and that no person placed under investigation or held in custody or any person in authority or agent of a person authority shall be subjected to physical, psychological, or mental harm, force, violence, threat, or intimidation, or any act that impairs his her free will, or in any manner demeans or degrades human dignity. In third paragraph, to ensure that a secret detention places solidarity, incommunicado, or other similar forms of detention where torture may be carried out with impunity are prohibited. And in Section 4 of Republic Act 9745, the acts of torture, it is for purpose of this act, torture shall include but not limited to the following. A physical torture is a form of treatment or punishment inflicted by a person in authority or agent of a person in authority upon another in his her custody that causes severe pain, exhaustion,
disability or dysfunction of one or more parts of the body, such as systematic beating, headbanging, punching, kicking, striking with truncheon or ripple bat, or other similar subjects, and jumping on the stomach. Number 2, food deprivation or possible feeding with spoiled food, animal or human excreta, and other stuff or substances not normally eaten. Number 3, electric shock. Number 4, cigarette burning. Burning by electrically heated rods, hot oil, acid by the rubbing or pepper or other chemical substances on mucous membranes or acids or spices directly on the wounds. Number 5, the submersion of head in water or water polluted with excrement, urine, vomit, and or blood until the brink of suffocation. Number 6, being tied or forced to assume fixed and stressful bodily position. Number 7, rape and sexual abuse, including the insertion of foreign objects into the sex organ or rectum, or electrical torture of the genitals. Number 8, mutilation or amputation of the essential part of the body, such as the genitalia, ear, tongue, etc. Number 9, dental torture or the force of extraction of the teeth. Number 10, pulling out of the fingernails. Number 11, harmful exposure to the elements such as sunlight and extreme cold. Number 12, the use of plastic bag and other materials placed over the head to the point of asphyxiation. Number 13, the use of psychoactive drugs to change the perception, memory, alertness, or will of a person, such as 1. The administration or drugs to induce confession and or to reduce mental competency, or number 2, the use of drugs to induce extreme pain or certain symptoms of a disease, and in number 14, other analogous acts of physical torture, and B. Mental or psychological torture refers to acts committed by a person in authority or agent or person in authority, which are calculated to affect or confuse the mind and or undermine a person's dignity and moral, such as 1. Blindfolding, 2. Threatening a person or persons or her relatives with bodily harm, execution, or other wrongful acts. Number 3, confinement in solitary cells or secret detention places. Number 4, prolonged interrogation. Number 5, preparing a prisoner for a show trial, public display, or public humiliation of a detainee or a prisoner. Number 6, causing unscheduled transfer of a person deprived of liberty from one place to another, creating the belief that he or she shall be summarily executed. Number 7, maltreating a member of a person's family. Number 8, causing the torture sessions to be witnessed by the person's family, relatives, or any third party. Number 9, denial of sleep, rest. Number 10, shame infliction, such as stripping the person naked, parading him/her in public places, shaving the victim's head, or putting marks on his/her body against his or her will. Number 11, deliberately prohibiting the victim to communicate with any member of his or her family. And number 12, other analogous acts of mental and psychological torture. In Section 5 of Republic Act 9745, other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment, other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment refers to a deliberate and aggravated treatment or punishment not enumerated under Section 4 of this Act, inflicted by a person in authority or agent or person in authority against another person in custody, which attains a level of severity sufficient to cause suffering, gross humiliation, or debasement to the latter. In Section 6, freedom from torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment, an absolute right. Torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment as criminal acts shall apply to all circumstances. In Section 7, prohibited detention. Secret detention places solitary confinement, incommunicado, or other similar forms of detention where torture may be carried out with impunity are hereby prohibited.